And we are recording this meeting. Thank you. We are going to wait until we officially begin for about 3 or 4 minutes, just to ensure that everybody who wants to be here is here and that they can hear the introduction. And I am seeing that many people are coming in as I speak. So we're going to wait about 3 or 4 minutes, but thank you very much for being here, and thank you for being here on time. Hi, if you've just come in the last minute or two, my name is Sean Devine. I'm the councillor for Ward 9. I'm going to be your host tonight, and don't mind the fact that there's a lot of silence going on. We're just waiting 2 more minutes before we officially start because many people are just coming in the door now. All right, we are going to officially begin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Sean Devine, and I am the councillor, the new councillor for Ward 9, Knoxdale-Merivale. Tim, can you nod if you can hear me? Fantastic. So welcome to this meeting. Thanks for being here. It's my pleasure and my privilege to be hosting this meeting, along with many people who will be speaking here tonight. I am grateful that everyone is here to participate in what I hope will be a really good example of civic discourse. And I'll let you know that good civic discourse not only means a lot to me in terms of principle, but good civic discourse is an essential tool to good community building and good city building. And that's one of my essential goals tonight, that we have a good civic discourse so that we can end up with the best results possible for what to do with this piece of property. So I'm going to be your host tonight, but I'm not going to be your moderator tonight. Before I hand it over to our moderator, Tim Abray. Hello, Tim, who is my executive assistant and who has moderated many kinds of conversations, such as that we're going to have tonight. Before I hand it over to Tim, I just want to let you all know that we are going to be doing things a little bit differently tonight. And I'll tell you why. So first of all, we are having this meeting online. And I know that I already received comments and concerns and even a question in the chat tonight that people had, hoped that the meeting would be in person. And I do understand that because we are having this meeting online and some people do not have access to computers, that some people will not be able to participate tonight. But we currently have 85 people here just as residents attending the meeting. And with the storm outside that is likely coming any minute now, we may even have more people attending this meeting tonight than we would have had if we had it in person. That said, we are recording the meeting and we will be distributing the recording of the meeting on our newsletter and on our social channels. I also want to just let you know that as your councillor, I am here with my colleague and fellow councillor, Riley Brockington. Hello, Riley. And there you go.
Sean. There we go.
And Riley, as many of you know, and many of the attendees here may be from Riley's ward, which is the adjacent ward, immediately adjacent to this property, River Ward. So it is my pleasure to have Riley participate in this conversation because this project affects his ward as well. And Riley will be speaking tonight as part of this meeting. The reason that we have, as many of you know, or anyone who has seen the invitation, one of the things that we're doing differently tonight as we collect questions and input and feedback and comments from you is that we are collecting those questions in written form. I can already see that many people have submitted a question in the question and answer box or whatever you call that. The reason that we are doing it in written form is because we want this process to be so that you, the residents watching, can present the clearest, most succinct questions possible so that we can present those clear questions to any of the stakeholders listening tonight, whether it be a question to myself or to Riley, or a question to the planners who are attending, or a question to the developers and the developers' representatives. So the moderators, Tim and Alexander, will be reviewing the questions to bring those questions forth. I do realize that, for anyone who's not on camera, or the fact that we are not allowing you to speak at this meeting, i.e. orally, might make it feel like you're not participating, but you are participating because we will be reviewing those questions. And as you already see, there is a chat function as well. You can obviously write your comments in the chat function. Those chats will not necessarily be part of the question and answer period tonight, but those chats are being, I beg your pardon, seen by myself and my team, and those chats will be recorded and seen by the planner. There was already another comment tonight that the people attending wanted to be properly recognized just how many people are participating in this process, because the number of people participating in a process is an indicator of the level of concern. And so we're recording this, but right now there are 80, it just went from 88 to 89. So we will keep track of how many people are participating so that we can communicate that as part of the What We Heard report. That's it for me right now. Everyone is going to have a chance to speak. I'd like to then now just hand it back to my moderator, Tim Abray, and he'll let you know how we're going to conduct this thing tonight. And then I'll speak later.
Okay, thanks very much, Sean. Just going to mute you for a second so we don't get an echo in here because we're sharing contiguous office space. Anyway, welcome to everybody who's here tonight. Some of you have already quite nicely figured out the chat function and the question and answer function, but I will talk you through that a little bit in a moment. But I want to clarify, I mean, obviously, if you're here, you understand that we're here to talk about the 780 baseline proposal. If you're here for something else, I'm sorry, you're going to be sadly disappointed. But 780 baseline is the subject of the discussion tonight. The main purpose of tonight's session is to make sure that everyone who is here has good quality, up-to-date information about the project as it currently stands. As Sean described quite nicely, a really important part of the planning and development process is ensuring that people have access to these processes, that residents of the area have an opportunity to voice their interests and concerns about it. And this is one of the ways of doing that. So it's important to keep in mind that this session is about that. It's about providing you with good quality information so that you can participate in the process. And ultimately, your participation best takes the form in submitting comments about the proposal. There are lots of ways, obviously, to provide input, but your most effective route is to ensure that you're participating officially. If you have something of substance and of interest to say, something that you think should be taken into consideration by the people considering this application, you need to submit official comments. And so this forum is your opportunity to get the information you need to submit the best possible comments you can. So this is an exercise in information sharing. It is not intended as an exercise in active debate, argument, back and forth. It's an effort to provide you with good information and answer those questions you might have. So we appreciate your patience in that. So there's a few things we're going to do tonight. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hear from Councillor Devine about this proposal. Councillor Devine is the new councillor for Ward 9, recently elected in the fall. So this is his first shot at having a conversation about this development with the people in the community. And that's a very important part of this process tonight. We're also going to hear from Riley Brockington, who is the councillor, returning councillor for Ward 16, which is right across Fisher, right across from this development. So obviously there is a lot of interest there and a lot of people in the community who will have questions and interest there. So we thought it was very important that Councillor Brockington participate in this process tonight. Then we're going to hear from the applicant. We're going to hear from various people on the applicant's team to bring you up to speed on the various changes that have been made to the project, the status of the project, the intent around the project, those sorts of things. They're going to give you the best rundown they can of things as they currently stand so that everybody is up to speed on the same details and we're all hearing it from the same sources. And then we're going to hear briefly just about process, about the next steps in the process from our city planners. Their participation tonight is mainly to listen. They're here spending their time in the evening to hear what the residents have to say, to hear what sorts of questions are being asked, and to prepare themselves for the sorts of comments you may officially submit through the official process. So that's an important distinction. If they can provide some clarification around process, questions, and that sort of thing, that's fantastic. But mainly their function here tonight is to listen to you and hear what you have to say via the questions you ask. So getting to that, your main route of participation tonight is to provide questions, okay? There are two segregated places for you to participate tonight. One is through the question and answer forum. I ask that that forum only be used for asking questions. We need to keep it nice and clean and clear so that we can sort through them and make sure that the questions you're asking are being answered. The other forum for more general discussion and sharing is through the chat forum. You can chat to each other there, you can provide messages there. We won't be actively engaging with the chat during the conversation tonight. Some people will be looking at it, some people will be participating in it. It's mainly there for you, but it's important to remember that the chat is going to be saved. It's going to be part of the record for posterity, so make sure that you keep it respectful and civil, and whatever you put there is something that you'll be proud to have on the record. It's very important that we try and make this as constructive and professional and civil as we can, because as I said, it's very important that we have a good, clear, informational discussion about this so that everybody has the information they need going forward. So let's make sure that happens. The chat should be enabled now. I see that people are in fact contributing to it. So if you haven't found the chat yet, feel free to grab it. If you just wish to sit back and listen and learn, that's excellent too. And if you do wish to submit a question, please feel free to drop those into the question and answer. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. We're going to get going shortly, and we're going to start this process out with some comments from the councillor for Ward 9, Councillor Sean Devine. So if you want to take it away, Sean, go to it.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Once again, I'm really grateful that so many people are here. It shows a lot of engagement, and nothing gets me happier than people being engaged in how to build better communities. So I'm glad you're all here for that. What I wanted to do was I wanted to provide a little bit of context of where I'm coming from with regards to not only this file, but urban planning and intensification and the goals of the newly approved official plan in summary. So I want to give you some context on that. And then I do want to speak to my current position on this file so that you, everyone in this meeting, know where I stand on this file. And then obviously I will be available for questions. In terms of context, so I have been transparent throughout my campaign and ever since I took office that I am in support of intensification and increased density for the city of Ottawa within the urban boundary. I am very much in support of that goal, and that is because I accept the fact that the city of Ottawa is growing and that it will serve the city well if that growth happens within the urban boundary, as opposed to the development of new subdivisions through urban sprawl. But I am not only in support of intensification as a prevention of further urban sprawl. I believe that the way that cities are moving is towards densification. And it's not only that we're doing this to prevent something worse, it's we're doing this because I believe, as many do, that intensification will make our cities better. And so I am in support of intensification. However, I am in support of good, reasonable, smart, sensible intensification. My ultimate goal is that the development that we have in neighborhoods leaves not just the city better for meeting its targets, but leaves the community better in where the property is developed. So I am supportive of the right kind of intensification and development. And so what we have here is we have a really, really important piece of property that is being developed, i.e. the plaza at 780 baseline. And there's no way around the fact that 780 baseline is a really important intersection of our city where I believe development and intensification can and should happen. There are many people, some people, not many, who believe that the best intensification is no intensification. I am not on that side of the fence. And so in my opinion, the status quo, i.e. leaving 780 baseline, leaving the Lone Star Plaza as it is not the right way to go. To me, that would be a wasted opportunity. And so here we have an opportunity to develop a property. And that's what we're debating tonight. That's my overall context. Well, the other bit of context is I'm not sure how much people who are attending this meeting know, but I'm aware of the various development files that are happening in and around Ward 9, and there's a lot of it, and there will be a lot of it. A lot of development is already slated to come to Ward 9 or the immediately surrounding areas, and a lot more development will be coming to Ward 9 and the immediately surrounding areas. And the other fact about that is that Ward 9 has not historically had the level of development and intensification that other wards have had over the last several years. And so Ward 9, to a certain extent, might not be used to the amount of development that we are looking at. And I very much sympathize with the anxiety and tension that causes people to see that level of change, especially in an area where there has not been much change. And so I'm very cognizant of that anxiety and tension that comes with seeing that change come before you. That's the context I want to present. And now, for the sake of transparency, I do want to let you know where I stand on this file. And I had this conversation with the developer already. I wanted to be transparent in letting the developer know that although I do believe that development at this site should happen, in its current state, in the project that is currently before us, the current development of 780 baseline, I likely would not support this file in its current state. And when I say in its current state, many of you may know that the project underwent a significant change only in the last few months. It was a project of a certain scale and size back in May, and then the project changed to a different scale and size in October. And so when I say in its current state, I would not likely support it, I mean in the state it is currently at. And for anyone who does not know, the current state is 3 towers on that plaza, 2 towers of 28 stories and 1 tower of 32 stories for a total of 998 units. So that's what I mean by in its current state. Like I said, I do want density, but it is my feeling and my assessment, and based on what I'm hearing from residents, that that is too much densification in this one area on that one lot. So for that reason, that's one reason, I would not likely be supportive. The other concern I have is that I'm very much, like I said, I believe in intensification, but smart intensification means that ideally that intensification comes hand in hand with the proper infrastructure to support it. And in this case, that proper infrastructure would be the baseline BRT. And on that aspect, I have a conundrum, because right now there are plans for BRT, for baseline BRT, but there is no funding for baseline BRT. And so the conundrum I have is I would very much like to wait for baseline BRT to be funded and confirmed before allowing this project. But I don't know if that's going to happen, because on the other side of the argument is that the development of this project could very well possibly incentivize the federal and provincial government to start funding BRT. It's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. And so on that aspect, I mean it when I say I've got a conundrum, but rest assured that to me, baseline BRT, having that bus line run along baseline to basically move the people who would live on the site is very important to me. So that's the other reason why I am not sure if I'd be supporting this project at this time. The third reason that I have concerns with this project, and Joey knows that I spoke to him about this already today, is that when I say in its current state, like I said, right now in its current state, this project is 3 towers, 28 stories, 28 stories, and 32 stories for a total of 998 units. Back in May, this project was in a different state. It was still 3 towers, but it was 3 towers of 25 stories, 25 stories, and 29 stories for a total of 868 units. The reason that the project changed is, well, there are a few reasons, but one reason that the project changed is because in its original state, the towers each had a podium, and the podiums were 6 stories high. And when those podiums were six stories high, there was too much of a height transition between the podium and the adjacent properties. And that severe height transition likely would have had the project not in compliance with policy. And so what the developer did was the developer quite reasonably said, all right, I will lower the podiums from 6 stories down to 4, understanding that by lowering the podiums, the developer lost a certain number of units. That's reasonable. And so what the developer did was increase the height of the towers to regain those units, which makes perfect sense to me. The frustration I have is that in increasing the height of the towers, the developer went higher than needed and ended up with more units than originally. And I found that to be frustrating. And I've said that to Joey, and Joey understands my position on that. It was frustrating to me that the towers ended up being more units when it could have been the same. And I say that because my goal in supporting good development, as I said, is development that is in the best interests of the community as a whole. And the community as a whole already expressed that one of their concerns, and it is a legitimate concern, is that the buildings are too tall, and that does have impacts, adverse impacts on the neighborhood. And so to come back with a second proposal that was higher than it had to be, it frustrated me in terms of the kind of relationship I want to have with developers and communities. And so for all of those reasons, that's why I have my current position of not likely supporting it. But I am willing to listen to residents to hear their concerns, and then try to formulate an argument to planners, and then to work with the developer to try to see if there might be solutions to all of that. So that's all I'm going to say for now. And now I'm going to listen carefully and answer questions when they come up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Devine. Councillor Brockington, have you got some opening comments you want to share with us?
Thank you very much, Tim. And yes, just very briefly, good evening, everyone. Thank you for participating and attending in tonight's session. Thank you to my colleague, Councillor Devine, for his organization and the staff. Appreciate it. And again, belated congratulations to you to coming into office. As Sean stated, River Ward is both across the street on the north side of this proposed development with the experimental farm, and the residential communities of Cortland Park to the immediate east on the other side of Fisher Avenue. So River Ward residents are very concerned and interested and concerned with the application, and have been following it since its inception, including the local community association. I think council as a whole will look at this file and look at its proposed placement at two arterial roads near a proposed BRT, and ask themselves about similar developments that have been approved in the past near transit stations, whether it be Transitway, BRT, or LRT. And there's actually policy from the city that has supported dense, tall developments in the past. So we have to be mindful that council, is represented by 22 out of 24 who are not from this immediate area. Sean and I, of course, are well aware of local issues, but we have some work to do when this matter comes before committee to give our colleagues the local context and concerns that have been raised within both wards. So there's some policy concerns already set. We had the official plan approved in November of 2021, and certainly River Ward residents said if you're going to build big, put it on the periphery of a community, not in the middle of a community. And so this is on the periphery and at the intersection of two arterial roads. So that we can't forget that. Now, what I've heard so far over the last year from residents are some very legitimate concerns. The application is intending to build something significantly larger and taller than what's currently permitted. And that height and density has a number of concerns, considering it abuts residential communities on two sides. The shadowing of homes and the farm are issues that have been raised. The impacts on local infrastructure and the road network, which many believe are stressed, are issues that have come up. And is this really congruent with the Carlson Heights secondary plan, are questions we need to hear from the city's planning department. And given that this is an application to go bigger and higher than what's currently permitted, and if we accept the fact that we want density near transit stations, then one question is, well, what is the acceptable height and density for that or within this corridor? This will not be the only application that we'll see along the baseline corridor over the next 20 years. So what are appropriate heights? What is appropriate density? We need to have that discussion. So Thanks everyone for coming tonight. I'm here to listen. Sean and I have met a number of times to discuss this file. We will continue to work collaboratively together. And there are still many months ahead before this actually comes to Planning Committee, but I appreciate the opportunity to listen and read comments and work with both residents of River Ward and Knoxdale-Merivale. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Brockington. I appreciate you being here tonight and listening to people and providing your input. All right, we're going to get to the meat of the presentations now. We're going to hear from the applicants. There's a lot of discussion going on, obviously, about this development. It's of deep interest. There was an initial application and then an amended application, and it's very important for us to hear the current status of that and what the intentions are from the planner. But I want to make sure Councillor Devine has a couple of last things to say before we get to that. So I'll give Sean a couple of minutes to talk about that, and then we'll get to the presentations from the applicants. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Tim. And Tim introduced me there as if it was organized. And now the council will talk again. No, it's because I just forgot to say something. So it's just me forgetting to say. So forgive me for the awkwardness of coming back in. The reason I wanted to come back in is because I think it's important that I reflect the positives here, as well as expressing the concerns I had. And so when you heard me say a few times that I would likely not support this project in its current form, obviously that implies that I could be supportive of the project in another form. But the other reason I want to speak again is because I want to reiterate that I am looking forward to working with communities and looking forward to working with developers that will listen to communities and support the best interests of communities. And although, like I said, I'm firm on some things that matters to me. I have had very good conversations with the developer, Joey Tiberes, so far, and I want that to be reflected. He and I have spoken a few times about this file, and he's been very transparent and very honest with me. And I do believe that there is potential for myself as councillor to channel my community's concerns to this developer, and that the developer will listen to those. And so I do look forward to having that kind of conversation with a developer who will listen. And I trust that Joey will want to have that same kind of exchange with me. So I just forgot to mention that. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. All right, so as I said, it's important that we get up-to-date information about the status of the project and the intentions of the project. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miguel Tremblay from Foten Planning, who's going to lead us through a variety of presentations from his team.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, councillors. We will try to be brief. What I'll do is I'll make some opening remarks and maybe walk you through our approach to the presentations. I'll also introduce our team so that you have a good sense of who is here tonight. And then I'll turn it over to various members of the team. We brought a smaller team than we normally do. I want to make sure people understand that when we submitted these applications, there's a very broad range of consultants that contributed reports that are going to be reviewed by municipal staff who are also here tonight. But we typically choose not to bring the entire team. For instance, John Stewart did a heritage study because we're in proximity to the experimental farm. That's an obligation that we have to measure impacts on NCC properties. We also have a servicing report. We have a geotech report to confirm that the soil qualities are acceptable to build these buildings. We have environmental reports to advise the city that there's no contamination on the property, or if there is, how do you remediate? We don't typically get a lot of questions from those disciplines, but if you do have a question on the geotech, you can forward the question on to municipal staff or the councillor's office. We'll work with them to get you some answers, but it'll be at a later time. So who we brought tonight, and again, I'm Miguel Tremblay. I'm a planner and a partner at Foten Planning and Design. I'm here with Joey Taberge and Jeremy Silbert. They're both from Taberge Homes. I am here with Scott Alain. He's a senior planner at FOTEN. So in the coming minutes, Scott is going to give you an overview of the policies and the zoning that apply currently to the property, and that'll include the new official plan. This is actually I think our third meeting on this property, and we've had a couple of kitchen meetings that included the community association. So we're not going to spend too much time on the policies, but we are very happy to respond and answer questions. Rod Leahy is here. He's the project architect, and he's going to be going through the design changes. So as the councillor noted, we had a previous version of this plan. We had the benefit of staff comments now, first round. We've had community comments that were condensed for us for staff. We've had councillor comments, both from the previous councillors. So there's been a fair amount of substantial changes to the proposal. For instance, the Parks Department requested on-site park as opposed to cash in lieu. So that's something that changed and caused the developer to respond. There was comments related to the podium heights, as the councillor articulated. There was comments related to access and project phasing. So really, Rod is going to spend some time explaining to you those changes. And then we also have Chris Gordon and John Kingsley from CGH. They are both transportation consultants. They prepared the TIA for the city to review. We're not going to do a full-on presentation for the transportation. We're going to let Christopher and John respond to comments. I can assure you that we have submitted their report to the city. Just to steal their thunder a little bit, there is sufficient roadway capacity to accommodate the additional densities. They've looked carefully at Baseline, Fisher, the intersection. They also looked at other intersections, including to the south. So I'm sure some of you will have some questions. All of those reports are listed on the municipal website. They're all accessible. You can read them and you can submit comments directly to staff. The CGH report also evaluates the role of transit on this site. You've heard that there is a BRT station as part of the baseline environmental assessment for the baseline BRT. There is a station immediately to the north. A lot of the comments from staff were about maintaining pedestrian connections and accessibility to that future station. I understand the dilemma that the councillor is facing, or both councillors really are facing, in that the reality is the city is proposing a station at this location for good reasons, but at the same time, both properties to the north are owned by the NCC, and I think it's a fair statement that in our lifetime, those properties will not be redeveloped with residential or other types of development that will support transit. A good portion of Baseline Road is characterized by single-family homes backlotting onto Baseline. So properties like this start to take on a lot of importance in contributing densities that will support that transit system. And yes, councillor, I would agree that these are the type of projects similar to, for instance, the projects that the city recently approved at the intersection of Clyde and Baseline for Gold Pro. These are the kind of projects that stimulate that funding and that investment into the BRT corridor. So just again, high level. So we've submitted a zoning bylaw amendment application. The zoning bylaws are essentially rules of construction. They tell you how high buildings can go, how close they can go to property lines, what kind of parking rates you have, what the landscape requirements are. So we've submitted a zoning amendment to change the zoning on the entire L-shaped property. The biggest changes are truly about building height. We meet all of the other provisions for the most part of the GM zone, but we are seeking additional heights and to amend the FSI, which is the density calculation. The current zoning on the property, as you're going to hear from Scott, really reflect a one-story commercial shopping center. And then there will be a second application for the first building, which is the one most south on Fisher Avenue. That application hasn't been submitted yet. Of course, we want to resolve, and we are required to resolve the zoning before the city can approve a site plan application. That will be an application at a later time if the city chooses to support the zoning amendment. At the end of the evening, Joey will add a few comments. I'm going to bet you that there's going to be a lot of questions about the existing tenants and those kind of things. We are focusing on the first building in terms of the construction. The plaza could conceivably be there for the next 10 years. There are existing leases. Joey has a fairly intimate relationship with the Lone Star restaurant. The intent is to keep them on site. Those existing tenants have permission. So the balance of the property along Baseline, even though we're seeking a zoning amendment, would likely not be constructed for the next 10 years. And there's a desire by Joey to enter into a program to kind of relocate some of the tenants on the site as new buildings come online. So, but as part of that application, there are concerns that we need to maintain the viability of the shopping center. So I'll probably leave my comments to that. Municipal staff is here to answer process questions, and it's probably best if that comes from them. So Scott has his presentation up. He'll walk you through the policies very briefly. We'll gladly return to those. And then as soon as Scott is done, just to keep it moving quickly, Rod Leahy's going to share his screen and show you the more technical building plans. So go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Miguel. Good evening, everyone. As Miguel hinted towards, my goal here is to be brief, just to leave enough time for the Q&A section. I realize that some of you have heard this context component as much as twice already, so forgive me for repeating myself. There have been some important changes in both the site and in terms of the design and in terms of the policy context. So I'll try and make those the majority of the presentation. As Miguel said, anything that you felt needed more explanation, we're always happy to reopen this presentation and go through it again. So we'll go right into the introduction. The site's been mentioned a couple times. I'm cognizant that you're all quite well aware of it being in your community. The site has changed slightly in its outline. So you'll see if you look at the panel on the right, there's an orange dashed line that traces the property. You'll see that there's now 2 lots that have been added. Those are 7 Hillyard and 9 Hillyard. Just to toggle back to the layout, you'll see that these 2 buildings are currently single detached homes. Part of the proposal, which we're not going to get too ahead into the proposal, the details until the architect takes on their component of the presentation. But suffice it to say, this will be a park of about 1390 meters squared. So that's about 1/3 of an acre. And the intent is that it would be zoned as park and maintained as a park. The proposal, if it helps for your reference, this building A here is the building Miguel was talking about and that others have mentioned will be the first step. So that means the strip mall above here will maintain operation while this enters as the first step. Accordingly, it's got a specific access that will be able to remain while the other buildings exist and while change occurs on the site. On a high level, this has been mentioned as well, but the Tower C, which is the building that's on the corner, will be the tallest tower. It's currently at 32 stories, and then A and B will be slightly reduced in height at 28 stories each. I'm going to go through the changes that have occurred in the design of the proposal at the end of my section. I just kind of wanted to give everybody a bit of footing before we go through some of the context elements. Again, this is just another visual showing the new kind of configuration of the lands that are being contemplated here. provides a little bit of view of the farm to the north, the experimental farm, of course, Sunnycrest Drive and Hillyard to the southwest, and the surrounding community, Lexington Park, and so on. Again, just more context. I expect that many of you are acquainted with this, so I'll just skip through this. Similar situation here. So this is kind of a visual that helps explain some of the things that Councillor Devine was noting, and Councillor Brockington as well. So this is the ultimate transit network, it's called, for the city of Ottawa, a clipping of it. And essentially it lays out where the city's planning to put transit over the next planning horizon of the official plan. So you'll see our site is labeled here. It's labeled on a couple things that you've heard before tonight, and you'll be hearing again more. So this east-west line here is the baseline BRT. This circle here notes that that's where a station's going to be when the baseline BRT is established. When the architect goes to their portion of the presentation, they'll be able to show you on their plan some of the detailed design for the station, and the environmental assessment for the station has been completed. So we were able to kind of imagine how that would fit into the plan for our proposed site. The north-south line you see here, it's called a transit priority corridor, and that's already basically in operation. What that means for transit priority is that they run more bus lines in terms of frequency, time of day. There's more benefits for buses moving more smoothly. So sometimes they get accelerated traffic signals or lanes or other various measures that help them move around. That's basically the transit network, and you can see how it kind of connects to the remaining transit network throughout the core. So again, as the councillors suggested, we're under a new official plan now. It's fully in effect. So the official plan provides some broad stroke direction on how development's supposed to occur in the city and where it's supposed to go. So subject properties at this pin here, you'll see the thick east-west line is what identifies the property's designation. So it's called a Main Street corridor. A Main Street corridor is supposed to be, and I'm just reading from the city's summary, but it's supposed to include a greater degree of mixed uses, higher level of transit, and higher levels of density assigned as well. The thinner north-south line here on Fisher, it's called a minor corridor. So that's also an area where it's identified that density is going to be located for various reasons, such as road capacity and things like that. The minor corridor is just a lesser order than the major corridor, which as you would know, we're on the corner of both of these. The shading here, that's called an evolving neighborhood overlay, which basically means that the city views that wherever you have this kind of dashing, that there's an expectation that over time, these neighborhoods are going to change. They're going to evolve to support a greater range of housing typology, a greater array of diversity of uses. And as Councillor Devine said, they're typically on the peripheries of communities such as this. And so this is the broad strokes. We're going to go into the Carleton Heights secondary plan just briefly. So this is the more specific assigned plan. As you would know, the Carleton Heights secondary plan has been, it predates amalgamation in its original form, and it's continued to be part of the planning framework. It was brought forward, and this is why it says 2021. It was brought forward into the new official plan. The planners at the city who made the new official plan kind of did some modernization and some aspects of updating it and kind of finding a way for it to fit into the new official plan. So the secondary plan now has a little bit more direction to consider the broader strokes into the way that planning happens in the secondary plan area. to think about when, mid and high-rise buildings, which have for the duration of the plan been contemplated. Now it points to some of the city's brand new transition policies for accommodating those. And lastly, this is the most fine-grained detail component. We talked about the zoning briefly. So as you can see, the majority of the property is zone GM. That means general mixed use. It's a pretty broad zone. It allows for residential, commercial, institutional. It's typical on main streets and more urban sites, and it works for this site. So what we're doing there is we're adding a new height schedule. So we're adding new height zoning bylaws to it, but otherwise we're maintaining the intent of the plan and the intent of the zoning, which is to have mixed uses fronting onto arterial roads. The bottom part here that says R1FF, that's the old zoning that reflects the two houses that are currently on this land. So because we're removing these houses and providing parkland, our intent is to rezone this from R1 to O1, which means open space, and that would be that would just protect that the parkland will be a parkland and would require a zoning amendment for anything to change on that basis. Thanks for your patience. We're almost through here. I'm not going to touch on this slide too much, except to say that the city has special guidelines for high-rise buildings, and those were also considered in our design. When we transition to the architect, he can tell you a bit about how those are applied. And lastly, just to dovetail into the architect's presentation, I wanted to help provide a bit of a visual on the way that the plans evolved. So we tried to incorporate some of the things we've heard and improve the logic of the plan. And I'm just going to go through based on these numbers. So firstly, if you look at number 1, the right-hand plan is the new one. You'll see we move the access road from along this edge to the middle of the site. What this does is it means that if you're on Sunnycrest or Hillyard, you're not backing onto a drive aisle necessarily. We've actually therefore moved this building so townhouses, townhouse style units will front onto Sunnycrest and Hillyard with direct access to provide more of a residential relationship. I believe you're all well aware of the context now where it's basically just a fence and then it's back of house stuff for the existing building. So this would try to bring our site into the neighborhood by creating a connection with this 4-story podium. And that's we also oriented, this is point 2, we also oriented the tower so it faces baseline rather than facing Fisher. It's a small nuance, but just another way to kind of break up the site a bit and facilitate a transition. You'll see with the park block, we've discussed this before, that's going to be the primary focus, and it'll be a true park. What we had previously shown was this, which is called a POPS, which means it's a privately owned public space. The benefits of moving here is now that we're internal to Hillyard, it's safer for children to get to. It would be less loud, it would be less windy, and just generally a better park location. It's closer to some of the more core portions of the neighborhood. I mentioned the podiums reduced from 6 stories to 4 stories. If it helps anyone who's wondering, the podiums are these portions of the building, and they're basically where the tower sits. And then I already mentioned the townhouse units, so those would be the ones shown here. Just before I sign off here, I just wanted to note that the connections through the site are still being maintained. So given that the BRT will be approximately here, we want this to remain porous so that people in the community can walk through this access way and still access the BRT, still use the site in the way it's been used to date as a way to get to Baseline or to Fisher. In the interest of time, that's it for me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and give the floor to Rod Leahy to go through the design in some greater detail. Thank you.
There you go. Can everybody see the screen? There you go. Yep, great. Thank you, everybody. I'll try to be brief. We spent a lot of time reimagining this site, and I want to speak to something that Councillor brought up, and I think I'm probably the most guilty party in this. When we looked at reimagining the building and lowering the podiums, and we did that, and we added building height, and yes, it was one to compensate. But the other thing that happened in the process is my client decided to buy 2 additional lots, some 15,000 square feet. So when I looked at it, and I looked at the original density that went in at, it was 4.1 density, I thought, well, why not? If density on this site isn't a big issue at this time, I hadn't heard people speak to density, numbers of units as a significant issue. I thought, why not just keep the density the same? So, and density is a simple calculation. It's basically the total square footage divided by the lot area, and that gives you a density. So we've gone from 4.1 to 4.1. It's actually exactly the same density, even though the building's gotten bigger. So anyways, I'm probably more at fault than my client at that. So because he was under the impression everything is staying the same, and then technically from one aspect of size, yes, everything has stayed the same, but we have increased the amount of building. So I think through this design development process, we'll work together and move. But more importantly, what we did in the process is really reimagine the whole site. And one of them was, as mentioned, just taking the park out of where we had it as sort of a more of almost like a Pops-like park to move it into a freestanding. And I think that was a brilliant move on part of my client. It sort of moved it right into a very safe area. And then we began to reimagine the buildings as, the discussions that we had with planning staff, with listening to some of the concerns of the community. We had, I think, a very sort of loose connection to the community with the original design, and it was sort of turning our back on the community. And this approach that we've done with this is really to reimagine the whole concept of the site and its relationship to the community. So we looked at lowering the podium, and we lowered it down to 4 stories, but we didn't, which you can't read in this, but when I get to the elevation, see, we actually lowered the edge of the building down to 3 stories. So we have that sort of 3-story to 4-story to the towers in behind, and we did that on both the buildings up front onto the residential streets. And so those, when we speak to townhouses, those are 2-story units within that structure, and it'll function like a townhouse. It's actually integrated right into the building. So the residents will be able to park their car underground. You won't have driveways all along Sunnycrest. It basically, they would park underground, come up through the elevator and access the unit from inside. But they will have private patios on the site for all of the units with access to the street. And so they will give that connection that's important. We also, the biggest change too, we looked at taking, as Scott mentioned, taking the driveway that was on the east side, making it a landscape strip with a potential for a simple pedestrian connection from Sunnycrest to Baseline without having to sort of cut through the site. But more importantly, we created this sort of green strip as a relationship to the existing residential units to the west. And then we, as we mentioned, the idea of when we looked at taking the park out of here, we thought, well, here's an opportunity to increase that edge along Fisher Avenue with the idea of creating that 4-story podium, which is sort of in scale from a human scale, along both streets, and then relocate the towers to maximize both sunlight, air movement, and just open the whole sort of existing neighborhood through the project visually. And then the other is they mentioned that access now is a small entrance coming in off of Baseline. And we've had a number of discussions on whether or not this is the best approach. It could be that we come in through an underground parking garage at this point, and this becomes a POPs area, so a public space right in the middle of the two buildings. That could be a very exciting approach. So again, we will, as we move through this design development, begin looking at other aspects. And then, as I say, we mentioned doing the same for Tower A, again, creating that street-friendly edge along the street, and really sort of redefining this whole area compared to what it is now, and we think a more appropriate approach. So I'm going to quickly go through floor plans there. You can see very large underground parking garage, probably will be connected at some point, maybe not. Right now we're doing two separate garages. You can see these are shaded in this brown color. This is the ground floor plan. These are the potential commercial areas. This is a central core area for the tower. And then you can see these are the townhouse units facing the street. These are townhouse units facing the inner courtyard. Again, townhouse units on building A facing the street. And then the commercial, with the idea of extending the commercial down Fisher Avenue. And again, that's a wish list right now at this point. We'll begin to really analyze that as we move forward, and maybe there's more commercial, maybe less commercial, maybe there's no commercial in this building. It's sort of early on in the process. As you move up, you see the units, basically the podium levels, then you move quickly into the tower component. And we have a combination in our typical floor plan. We have everything from 3-bedroom units to studios. So we go studio, 1-bedroom. We'll probably have 1-bedroom plus, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom. So a wide range that we see. The townhouses on the lower level have an opportunity to be 3-bedroom townhouses. We're really trying to actively engage the idea of families moving into these buildings. You know, we have a housing crisis, and this is a way that we can begin reimagining what these buildings are like, as opposed to just being for empty nesters or young professionals. So, and it's really type of project you begin to reimagine the potential by this type of sort of approach. And then, of course, these are the buildings everyone hates to see, but the height where we transferred the density upwards. And the lines across are various points, the angular plane. And there's no hiding the fact that we project through the angular plane, but in our defense, we feel that the way we've designed the building, the impact on the street is more important in terms of its relationship to the community compared to height. Under the old ways of developing sites like this would be large slab buildings of 12 or 14 stories running across the entire length of the property. We'll have solved one issue with height, but created these walls that really aren't very attractive. This approach has been quite successful in cities around North America, and Ottawa is quickly adopting this approach, and it's, in my opinion, it's working quite nicely. So these are views from the distance. These are views that I get most of the concerns right now when we talk about height, but it's also about placemaking, and you know, Miguel talked about the fact that, you know, you've got a very odd situation with Baseline. We have a one-sided corridor for a large part of the street, and how do we get density to support transit when you can't develop the other side of the street? I mean, you can look inward into the community and start allowing 4-story small apartment buildings. There's lots of ways to do it, but our approach, and my thinking personally, is that this approach to intensification really allows the communities like this existing community to coexist nicely between the two. But it's really important that you begin creating an environment that works. And so these are sort of, again, we're at the lower level view, sort of the idea of the scale of those townhouse units. The upper right is sort of still an aerial view showing that intersection, the internal street and our townhouses and landscaping in front. But more importantly, when you get into the project and you just begin to see the sort of the scale of the street and the scale of the townhouse units and the landscaping, you see that our hope and our experience in the past is that the higher buildings, although exist from, communities farther away, the real impact on this development is its integration into the existing community. And again, you can see these are the townhouse units on the street with direct access to the street, landscaping, outdoor terrace areas. So these two-story units become essentially three-story townhouse units that become very desirable. And really, this becomes the focus from the community point of view. This becomes the focus of the community, not the towers. They're really addressing the more urban transit-oriented baseline road. So that's our approach from a sort of urbanist approach. We're quite comfortable with it. Now, we've done the sunshade diagrams. I think these are all on DevEps. They should be. It's important if you know where your unit is, you can easily pick out where they are. We do them essentially for 3 days a year. It's June 20, essentially the equinox and the solstice. So we do June 21st, September 21st, which is the same as March 21st, and then we do December 21st. And you can see in this case, we sort of stopped at 3 p.m. because essentially the sun's gone down at that point. So that's my presentation. Just getting back to numbers and how did we increase 120, I think, units in simple terms. If you look at, we have 10 units per floor in the towers. We've added essentially 9 stories of towers, 3 in each building. I say rightly or wrongly, I'm saying that's, and so in simple math, that's 90 units. And then in the reconfiguration of the building, we actually picked up areas in the podium to increase the amount of ground-oriented units. We had almost no ground-oriented units in the original design. So that picked up the difference of these unit counts. So again, I apologize for the confusion. But that is my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions as we move forward. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to jump in here and say if we can move along as quickly as we possibly can. It's important that we get to some of the questions that we've had. So have we got a couple more things to do, or are we getting close to the point? No, we're there.
That's it. I mean, I think we can, again, we're not going to ask Christopher to do a presentation, so.
Great. Yeah, there are questions about that. So maybe that's what I'll do to begin with, to give a bit of an entry point to that. There have been quite a few questions about the impact on local traffic patterns. Particularly, people are interested in the intersection around Malibu and Fisher. And perhaps someone could talk a little bit about the effect on local traffic patterns. There's a lot of concern about that intersection already. And there are many, many, many questions in the Q&A about the impact on local traffic. So maybe if we could talk a little bit about local traffic and talk a little bit about parking provisions. How many parking spots are going to be provided and what is the expected impact on the neighborhood?
Sure, well, I can certainly start on the traffic, and I could probably appropriately start to talk about the parking and then turn it over to Miguel and Scott to get in the details. So, so hi everybody. Just to keep this short and sweet, to keep things moving along, the traffic report that and transportation impact assessment, really, because it's more than just car traffic. We certainly look at every single mode. And I think the councillor used a good term, I like to use it too, is that planning is really a chicken and egg process. It's done in a stepwise manner. So what we're looking at is kind of the final state of what this development could be with the 3 buildings and all of the retail. So when we take a look at the transportation impacts, there's no question that over time, the area will get busier, but the roadway and transit and cycling and pedestrian infrastructure will also be changing and morphing over time. So I did see and was watching in the comments and questions about timing with respect to the baseline BRT. That is something that the new council will be looking at as part of the new transportation master plan process. But long and short of it is, yes, there will be additional demands for vehicles as well as pedestrian and cyclists on those key intersections, the study area intersections. But I think too that in terms of meeting the city's overall objectives with respect to growth, the way that we're planning our infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, I think best manages and mitigates what those impacts are going to be. So it's not just going to be completely car traffic that's generated by this development. There's the significant portion of those trips will be made by transit, particularly, of course, when the BRT is constructed. So moving on to, as you mentioned, Tim, parking. Parking is a funny thing in that intuitively you think that the number of cars that are being parking stalls, if you will, in a particular site is what generates the traffic. That's really not true. You can imagine that in the future, someone's going to be living in this building. They may actually have a car where they will use it on weekends and for shopping and off-peak times. But in fact, the reason that they're at this location is because of that efficient and capable BRT system. So, so while the parking numbers are really reflective of the city's TOD policies, there's also kind of that reasonableness of what has to happen. So no question that as we work through the parking analysis, it's intended to be contained on the site and not have any impact on the adjacent community. So I would probably refer to Scott to talk about the specific numbers, but the intent is really that the parking will be contained on the site for residents, for visitors, as well as the commercial uses that will be there. So happy to answer any other questions afterwards, but I think that's in summary the transportation outcome.
Okay, and we did have a couple of follow-ups to that because there were some concerns about the points of access to the site for traffic,
Yes.
Whether or not there's safety concerns there, particularly if the intention is to add 1,000 units of housing here, many of them 3 bedrooms. That's going to involve families.
Yep.
There's some concern about things like school buses and children coming and going from the site. Is that part of the consideration for this traffic study, and what is going to be done about that?
So absolutely. Certainly at this level, the exercise, of course, is examining zoning. So this is a higher level planning. And as we get into site plans, so if this, as has been discussed, will develop in phases, and the first site plan will be the one building that is not currently where the mall is. So as we get into the site plan exercise, absolutely, we'll be taking a look at a much closer look at the operations of those access points. You'll see on the plan, we're contemplating a secondary access onto Fisher. So that will distribute traffic. And I think too that over time, as the city works at the baseline corridor, we're going to see how the contemporary changes that we make to our corridors when we're reconstructing them are going to be in place. So we're going to have a greater level of safety for our for pedestrians and cyclists, certainly with cycling tracks, sidewalks, the Twizzies, those metal, so for accessible features at the way that the intersection is going to be designed, but in particular to the access to the site, right? The redevelopment will give us the opportunity to focus on the space and use again more contemporary design features to allow for a safer environment for all of the different modes.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. I'm sure there will be a lot more questions about that as time goes on. I mean, there are many, many questions about that. Forgive me, but there are some people expressing some incredulity about the idea that adding 1,000 new units won't impact local traffic patterns. So maybe if you could spend another minute just talking about that.
I certainly didn't say that it won't impact traffic patterns. And over time, and this isn't just a 780 baseline road issue. Over time, our city is growing from 1 million to 1.4 million. So generally speaking, right, our travel demands, the reaction that is transportation is going to grow. And so we know that those demands are going to be there. Now, you can also see that the way that technology, look at this, many of us didn't have to travel anywhere to get to this meeting tonight. So there's a lot of things with respect to virtual travel that are going to impact our travel patterns. There's the from a mass transit perspective, the growth in travel we are expecting and encouraging to be on buses. Now, will there be an increased volume of cars? Yes. Congestion at certain times will also increase, but to meet the overall city objectives, our goal is to mitigate particularly the single occupant automotive use. And I think that all the components to be able to do the best we can are actually a part of this project. If those that are interested in that particular topic, and I won't get into it in detail now, but they could take a look at our report, and you'll see that there's something called transportation demand management that is also encouraged. The city has policies about this. A perfect example would be that, when transit is there, the new building goes up for example, for a period of time, for the first 6 months or what have you, residents of those new apartments get a free transit pass. So that would be encouraging them to get into the habit of using transit, and they'll find that it is a part of their daily lives. So I think that we have all the tools, and I think that the city is being very proactive about those progressive attitudes towards transportation, and so we'll use all of them to again mitigate the increase. The increase will happen, but how we manage that increase it will be determining how well a job we do here. So I think we've got all the tools to get that done.
Okay, I appreciate that. All right, we also have a very large number of questions asking about the impact of a prolonged period of construction on the neighboring communities, dust, noise, those sorts of things. A lot of people are interested to hear the developers speak to how they plan to mitigate those things, what recourse residents may or may not have, a little bit of clarification around that so that people can hear you talk a little bit about what the experience of this will be like for the neighborhood. Who wants to take that on?
I can take that one on here. Other stuff, I'm thanking everyone for coming today. It is, I know it seems like we're not listening to the community, but I do think we're listening and constantly improving, having a close relationship with, soon to be, the new councillor's office in the city. We do want to make this a really well thought out plan, not just density, that I can see a lot of the chat coming in. As far as your question, Tim, regarding construction, we have 2 sites currently underway, similar sized projects or buildings. And we do control them with fence materials, having the public have access to the site foreman for comments and questions, which we do get on a weekly basis, what we can help with construction guys parking on the street, what have you. It's hard to avoid. So we do take these measures on, and the city will place some construction measures in place and access. For instance, the city may put something in place where we won't be accessing the city street, Hilliard or Sunnycrest, for construction traffic, and keeping it on the main streets on Baseline and Fisher. A few other comments, if you want, if you don't mind, maybe I'll just speak a little bit on a couple of comments that I've heard. Just regarding density, I don't want our architects just to take the brunt of this all the time. he's taking here, but we tried to keep the density of the site the same, which goes to an FSI of a full site. We kept it on the 4.1 and went down to actually a 4.08.
For
we
those who
did-
don't know, can you explain FSI and what you're talking about there?
It's a force space index. So the city uses this in different locations in the city. You take your size of the land you have and you do a multiply of that for density. When I speak of density, I went over this with the councillor earlier. When I speak of density, I think of just square footage, not so much unit count. The unit counts we're showing today may be totally different than what we actually go through with. It's, for instance, we added square footage here and the unit count went up a lot more than I would have expected, which would mean, we're doing very smaller units. That's something we need to look at more in detail rather than being 850 units. Perhaps this will be 750 units, but have a lot of 3-bedroom and large 2-bedroom units to have more family-oriented development rather than downtown Ottawa, where your average square footage is probably, don't quote me, is about 650 square feet. We have a project in the suburbs right now where our average size is in around 900 square feet, larger size units. So I know we're focusing on the unit count. I'm going to try to tread away from that because we really haven't looked at the design of the inside of the building as much as we should at this stage. So where this density came in and why it got so much larger. Yes, we added 3 stories on the 3 buildings. What that was for was to do a density transfer. What that means is take our low-rise portion of the site, which is 6 stories, take 2 stories off of that and add it to the height of the buildings. What we did though is we removed the internal green space park. We bought up 2 properties inside the neighborhood to put a larger park that's about 4 times the size. We then put a 4-story podium in its place. One of the things on with the urban design comments from comment 1 was they wanted to see the perimeter of the site. So everything abutting the single family homes on Sunnycrest and Malibu, as well as internally abutting the inside of our site. We wanted to bring it this townhome feel. I think our architect, Rod, and his team did this quite well. It kind of mirrors what they've done in other areas of the city. I think it's Homewood there by Lansdowne Park, where you have these townhomes that are attaching to the rear of a podium. What we're trying to do is make this more of a pedestrian-friendly walkway when you're coming around the neighborhood and when you're standing. In doing this though, the square footage of the site did increase by, I believe, roughly 67,000 square feet, around 10% increased. But that increased because we also purchased 10% more land, which is now going to become a park. I'm going to put this on, I know this is not, I'm putting this on record now. This 2 houses are not for any intensification of putting development on this land, which is, I believe, Scott Allen at FO10 reiterated, we'd be seeking zoning of an open space here. A lot of residents have sent emails, comments to everyone in the team that we're buying up land to make the site larger inside the neighborhood. That is absolutely not the case, and I've explained this to Councillor Devine and Councillor Brockington that's here today, just to alleviate that concern, because I think a lot of emails have been going to their offices regarding that. A few other things that I've heard that I'm just going to make a few comments on, and I wouldn't mind maybe saying a couple things at the end. Our offices, we're always open to discuss. If anyone wants to put a group together to do a smaller form discussion, we're more than happy. I know a lot of people don't like having these online discussions because you can't just speak what you want to say, you're relying on a chat. I'm open to it. If the council's office is open to having small focus groups discussions, we're more than happy to attend. We bring our team and we can discuss it. I do feel our new design, we have taken the city's comments. If we look away from just density, I believe the second submission really takes a lot of concerns. In the first submission, there were flags that the city made on comments, and I think we hit the mark on about 4 of the 5 or 4 of the 6 comments. Lowering the podiums, making them townhomes. These are true to be true townhomes that actually could walk out your front door into the street, not just go into a building. A couple things I just want to touch on. The park. So what we were showing before, I don't have the exact size with me, but I believe we went around 3 to 4 times the size of the internal park, and we brought it outside of the existing baseline Fisher Corner. What the city wants to do with this park, we're more than open to. I know there was comments about swimming pools, structures. That's something that's kind of out of the developer's hands and something that maybe you would discuss with, you know, your local councillor or the city planning staff on what happens with this park. But one thing it does ensure is that this is staying in your community. It's not where a developer just pays cash and it goes to, there were some comments, it just goes to different projects around the city. This park stays in your community and it's usable just for the community. It's internal now. It's not on a city street. There were some comments that should be, you know, put the park on Basin or on Fisher. Well, myself with, you know, with children, you don't want your children playing on the street. We brought it inside the park, inside the neighborhood. Whether again, that's a swimming pool or what have you, that's again something for the community. Solar was something brought up. My 2 projects on the go right now, we're doing roofs completely with solar. It's something we'll definitely investigate in this project. What will this project be? Phase 1, we're feeling it's going to be a rental, but we don't know what happens in 2 years from now. As we all know, the economic changes, what the forecast is going to be in 2 years. You know, if we had that crystal ball, and we're not sure. So we're hoping that phase 1 will be a rental, seniors, you know, young professionals, adults, but it'll be for everybody. It's not going to be designated just for one. There's going to be a low income component, an affordable component with this. Any comments that talk about affordability shouldn't be here. I don't like that. All of our developments have an affordable component to it. Looking at a few other, I made a few notes here while we were going through the chat. The larger units one is one that I think is something on a previous development we just did. We committed to doing larger scale units in most of the corners of the buildings to allow for families to come in here, not just what you see on typical high rises, 600, 650 square foot, you know, 1 bedrooms. That's something I've made that clear is something we're looking to do with the councillor. That's the reason why I'd like to comment that I'm not focusing on how many units we're showing right this minute, because that's going to change depending on the size of the units and what kind of 2 and 3 bedrooms we use. That's all the comments I had right now. Again, I do monitor the chat what's here, and I'll see if anything else comes up, and if they want, we can do another quick finishing at the end.
Yeah, no, I
I'll just
appreciate
say, Tim, I think that's your construction question.
Yeah, I appreciate it. No, that's good. I mean, people have been asking to hear from you, so it's good to hear you at some length and some substance. And just to remind people, part of the reason we're using the chat and using the questions in a normal face-to-face forum like this, if you had this many people in a room, it would be very difficult to get too many questions in. This way, at least, the planners are here, they're seeing the questions, they're seeing the chat, the developers are here, they're seeing the questions, they're seeing the chat. We're getting a lot more volume of commentary from the people in this room at the moment than we could possibly get in a live situation. So while it sounds like there will be other opportunities to provide input, it's really helpful for us, the stuff that you're putting in the chat and the stuff that's going into the questions. Councillor Devine.
No, I won't waste any people's time because a lot of people want to talk. Only that I'm glad that we're having the second conversation on how the developer and the architect see density differently than concerned residents see density. When I'm talking about my concern about density, it's about the number of units, the height of the building, the number of people translating to the number of cars. And I completely understand why developer and architect talk about density in terms of square foot, because they sell according to square footage. I'm glad to hear that there's an understanding that our concern over density could lead to a decrease in the number of units, because that can lead to an understanding that there could be fewer people, certainly could be lower height, and it could be fewer cars. That's all I want to say. Back to your questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. All right, we also have a lot of questions about, this is probably one for the planning department to help clarify for people a little bit. There are a lot of questions in the chat and in the questions and answers about the relationship between the secondary plan and the official plan. Perhaps if one of you could clarify how those work together, it will help people better understand what we're dealing with here and how to interpret that. So could either of you speak to that?
I can start if you want. So official plan is a citywide document. It's approved by council. It's a 20-year vision, how the city will grow. It allocates land use densities, all of those things, and it guides infrastructure investments through the transportation master plan, infrastructure master plan. Secondary plans are finer grained documents. They are supportive documents to an official plan. They are often community driven. In that, communities don't input to a larger scale on an official plan. They do input into secondary plans. The city had, I think, 82 or 92 secondary plans citywide. They chose to carry over less than half of those. This is one that they initially did not intend to carry over and ultimately did. It is very much one of the older secondary plans that doesn't recognize, for instance, the Baseline Road BRT corridor. This site in that document is discussed generally as a minor commercial node, but it does have policies that encourage the consideration of high rise. It doesn't have to be just a minor, Class B shopping center. The plan was carried over with some amendments, as you heard from Scott, that the city did refine the language a little bit and tried to put it a little, without changing fundamentally the intent of the 1980 plan. It made efforts to modernize it a little bit and recognize transit along that corridor. So we've looked at it on a few occasions in the context of this application. We are of the opinion that the language in that plan provides sufficient direction for how to treat the property without an amendment to that document. And I think that I know Tony in the community and others suggested that there could be an amendment to that document. My reading of it's not necessary, that there is sufficient policy direction to inform us as to how to deal with these applications. I don't want to put words in staff's mouth, but the original, we had pretty extensive discussions with at least policy staff before Kelly came on board. Policy staff is in agreement. So, but it's intended to be a supportive, finer grained document. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Kelly, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll build onto that, because I do want to mention some things. And just so in terms of process, before a planning application is made, so the zoning bylaw amendment in this case, city staff, we actually consult with an applicant on the file, kind of speak about what they're looking to propose, and this is called a pre-consultation. So in this case, it was decided by the previous planner, not myself, that an official plan amendment would not be required, and that was based on the kind of the older version of the secondary plan before it was brought forward with the new official plan. When I picked up the file as well, I had to do the kind of the same evaluation, and that's asking myself, well, does this comply with both the official plan and, like Miguel said, the finer grain, kind of more specific secondary plan? And really, I don't want to. I think it deserves to get. I should get into detail to kind of answer some of the community concerns. I've heard this a lot from people, and so I'll explain kind of why I'm of the opinion that both mid and high-rise buildings can be considered on the site. And so this is designated a minor shopping area. And so, I understand people hear that and they think, well, that doesn't sound like what's being proposed currently. If you look to the policies, I think there's enough wording in there to kind of justify what's being proposed. And under 3.3 minor shopping area in the secondary plan, it specifically says that building height restrictions apply as outlined in section 243. So if you go A to B and look to section 243, it says that maximum heights for mid and high rise buildings, so speaking to mid and high rise buildings in the minor shopping area, and the maximum heights for those will be determined by, and then it lists quite a few criteria. And those include an applicant's ability to provide transition in accordance with the urban design guidelines, both in the official plan and the urban design guidelines themselves. And this kind of works into some other comments and concerns I've heard from the community, which is that our staff evaluating the proposal in accordance with urban design guidelines, and the short answer is yes, we definitely are. Not only myself, but we have urban design staff that are assigned to the file, and they're looking at it very closely. As was mentioned, they've reduced the podiums from 6 to 4 floors, which staff see is a good sign. And we're still evaluating the height and whether or not that's something that's acceptable. But fundamentally, to answer the concern, in my opinion, this is consistent with the secondary plan, and mid and high rise buildings can be considered. That's not to say, necessarily they can build to the highest heights possible in every instance, but we need to look more specifically into, okay, why and how should that be considered? And that's how I would respond, and so we have to look at both the official plan, the new official plan, and the secondary plan together to come to a determination. But I think that's why in this case we aren't requesting an official plan amendment.
Okay, that's very helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of people. Again, many of the questions relate to the density of the project, the size of the project, and the site. So that's very helpful in terms of clarifying for some. I'm sure there will be more questions, and of course, the process will continue. Just to remind people, this is an information session. It is not the beginning or the end of the line at all. It is simply an opportunity for you to hear from the participants, hear from the city, to express your questions, to participate in the chat. It is a really good information gathering exercise. One more area of questioning that's come up quite a bit in the Q&A and the chat this evening. This goes back to city planning. It's largely to do, it's a related question to the one I just asked you and that you just answered, but it's mainly, as a lot of people say, the elephant in the room is the size of the height of the towers and the transition from the neighboring community, which is mostly 1- and 2-story homes that have been there for quite some time. And so what they're looking for is a little bit of an explanation around the rationale around the transition. We heard a bit of that in the initial presentation, but from a city point of view, how is that transitioning policy applied? How can you help people better understand that so that they know how to respond to it?
Yeah, for sure. I'll explain it by saying it's definitely, that's the fundamental and most difficult kind of question that we're up against with this file. And obviously it comes through by the comment that the community is providing, and also the analysis that we're currently and still doing. And so it's really a balancing act. And it's, yes, how do we kind of build in a way that's going to be supportive of this bus rapid transit corridor, and in a way that's supportive of the new official plan policies, which very clearly say that this is a Main Street corridor. We need to build densely in order to support transit, and there are many reasons why density should be something that's sought at the site. At the same time, we need to also be respectful of the existing context. And I admit it's a challenging site because the city and our current policy that has been passed very recently calls for change in this area, and it's an area that hasn't changed very much at all. You look all around, it's all single detached homes, and everybody who lives in the area is very well aware of that. And so transition, that's one criteria by which we, and not just myself, but my entire team, we evaluate, the design and acceptability of a zoning bylaw amendment application. And so when we, and that 45-degree angular plane, which residents have very correctly pointed out, is one of those criteria. That is something by which we evaluate the acceptability of the height of a proposal. And that's one method. It's not the only method. There's a lot more questions we have to ask ourselves, but that's one way in which urban design staff will look at the file and say, okay, well, this is part of our evaluation. Is the height acceptable or not?
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I've got a question for the councillors involved here. Obviously, there's a mix of questions we're getting, some of them highly technical that I know that our planners will appreciate greatly. Some of them are very much just about the character of the neighborhood, the emotional impact this has on neighborhoods, the challenge of living in a construction zone, the challenge of change, the challenge of the emotions that people feel around this. Can either or both of you speak a little bit to that? Ensuring that residents know that, you know, does this matter to you? Does this stuff matter to you? Yeah, Councillor Devine.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Oh, you got to unmute.
Thank you. So yeah, the impact that this project will have on people's quality of life during the construction of the project absolutely does have an impact on me. And whether or not that concern is something that planners take into consideration, because I'm not sure whether it's a policy thing, it certainly is something that I as councillor take into consideration. And that consideration is obviously affected or measured by the scale of this project, which is 3 large towers and podiums that will be built over a prolonged period of time. And therefore, the impact that it will have on people's quality of life and mental health is exacerbated. And I definitely take that into consideration. And one reason I take this into consideration, and again, this goes back to my overall concern, while I fully respect the fact that the developers are saying, essentially, the city needs this kind of development, the city needs this kind of intensification, we are fulfilling the city's need, they are not the only developers that are going to fill this need. They're not the only building that's going to get built. Buildings will get built. We will meet our needs. And so I have to consider whether or not the extenuated stress and concern on residents is worth it when there could be other development that can fill our city's needs. So yes, I do take that into consideration, which is again, one of the reasons why I am looking to do what I can to meet my goal of intensification through many projects, not just this one, that will benefit the community. So yeah, I do listen to it. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Brockington, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, my experience having been on served 2 terms is, you know, development files gets probably the most reaction from residents for what's being proposed. This is part of our neighborhood. It impacts particularly people who abut proposals, and you get a lot of people that come out to these meetings. Challenge is there's no guarantee of what your neighborhood, what it looked like when you moved in X number of years ago, that it will remain exactly the same going into the future. Neighborhoods evolve over time, and we as a city are experiencing substantial growth. And what we had to deal with the official plan review is trying to accommodate 400,000 more people over 30 years. And we took a fairly aggressive approach to intensification that will see 400,000 more residents join our city, and we have to find places to put them. So that doesn't mean that people's input and concerns about how this will impact them are thrown out the window. No, the local councillors obviously are most in tune with those concerns than any other member of council. And it's our job when this comes forward to ensure that those concerns that you've raised with Councillor Devine and myself are shared with our residents. The challenge is, how is this application different than other applications? In other words, that is, how do we convince our colleagues that there's something different here that they're not experiencing with their own communities and their own boards? And again, I'm not saying that concerns brought forward are invalid. They are legitimate. And there's still a number of questions that have to be addressed and have to be addressed successfully for Councillor Devine and I to support this before it goes forward. But that's our challenge when all of council gets to vote, is ensuring that our colleagues are aware of all the issues and concerns that exist out there for our residents. So some matters can be mitigated, some matters can be addressed, some we might not be able to find a resolution with the proponent or the city planner. And we have to force that per the vote when it goes to committee and council. So there's literally dozens of issues on my list that have accumulated. Many have been raised with my meetings with the developer and or planner, particularly the planner before Mr. Livingston that we have now, but there's still a lot on our plate that's outstanding for me that causes me discomfort before this file can go further. So that's why Councillor Devine and I have committed to work together. Two is better than one on addressing the issues that both of our wards are facing with this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for those comments. Obviously, we have slipped past our time, but it's obviously important to get to the questions that people have been asking. We're doing our best to cover the broad territory of the variety of questions people have been asking. We're going to try and wrap it up in the next 10 to 15 minutes for sure. We're going to put a hard stop in for 9 o'clock. Absolutely. So there's a couple of other major categories that I think we should probably address before we move on. One of them I'll address because I'm aware of what's going on with it. There have been quite a few questions asking about the effects of the building shadows on the experimental farm north of Baseline. Obviously, there are parties to this. The parties have been alerted. They are involved in the process. Obviously, Agriculture Canada is involved. They are going to provide their own comments on this file. So for those of you expressing concerns about that and wondering if that is part of the process here, it is absolutely part of the process. Another series of questions that are being asked revolve around the handling of aging infrastructure in the area, the ability of the new site to mesh with that and not overburden it, the issues about drainage, about sewers, about stormwater handling. Is there someone that could handle a bit of a conversation about that to try and give people a little bit more information about A, the potential impact on the infrastructure in the area, and B, specifically the effects on things like stormwater handling and the potential for the effect on neighboring properties?
So I'll do it very quickly and probably more so in referencing you back to the servicing analysis. So in support of the zoning amendment, you have to support a site servicing study that confirms that there is adequate potable water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater discharge areas. You're not allowed to impact adjacent properties. You can't have negative drainage onto anyone else's property. All of the stormwater has to be captured and directed to municipal stormwater facilities. If there is insufficient capacity, the developer bears the cost and obligation to upgrade the system. That's the same with a pump station or to address inadequate water pressure, right? Because you're pumping water to a fairly tall building. All of those, including private infrastructure, gas, phone lines, whatever, is all to the developer's obligation to demonstrate that there is either capacity or that they will supplement. So I'll just leave it to that.
Okay, much appreciated. I hope that answers at least some of the questions around it. We have covered the vast majority of the categories, at least, and I know some people would be hoping for much deeper questions around this, but there is more process to come. This is really just the beginning of the process. There is a lot of work to do from here. Perhaps what I can do is get Kelly Livingston from the planning department to talk a little bit about that process and the next steps to reassure people that this is not, a one and done situation, that there are opportunities for input and there is more process to come. Kelly, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, as Tim just mentioned, this is really a working and evolving process. I know it could possibly seem like decisions have already been made, but that just isn't the case. We're still working together with the developer. I'm still reading every single comment that comes in. Everybody who emails me at kelly.livingstone@ottawa.ca. You're all added to the list of comments. Those are all comments that I will eventually be responding to in a future staff report. And so just at a very high level, what the process really is that an applicant makes a submission for and they have for zoning bylaw amendment. That submission is then reviewed by city staff, and it's also circulated to the public. So the public is notified, city staff review those documents. And so we review those documents, we review public comment, and then provide those comments back to the applicant. There's really a back and forth kind of evolving process from that point on. And that's where we are today. Eventually, ideally, the city, eventually gets to a place where they are comfortable with the proposal. Ideally, the councillors are on board. And ideally, the proposal evolves to a place where the community is also comfortable. So, kind of eventually in the end, what happens is I would eventually write a report to council, or rather planning and housing committee. That report would, it would include a full policy analysis of every policy, the official plan, the secondary plan, and all the documents that were submitted. It would also include a response or consideration of all public comments that were received. And it would ultimately include a recommendation to the committee and then council as a whole. And so we're still early in the process. I'm still reading every comment and concern that comes in, and we really are considering all of them. So, we haven't made any decisions yet. We're still reviewing the files, and the comments that you provide still certainly do have an impact. And so that's really the process as we are now. There's no current plan for a planning and housing committee date. The last thing to note is that everybody who does provide comments to myself or submits feedback through our online tool, which I understand is offline right now for some reason, I'll certainly look into getting that fixed up. But everybody who provides a comment, those will all kind of add you to the list of people that will be notified of the committee meeting. So you'll be notified of when this ends up going to Planning and Housing Committee. You'll have an opportunity to speak at that meeting, and then council will eventually, make their decision on it. And certainly, the comments that you provide will have an impact and be heard by your councillor, and council as a whole. So that's really the process. You'll be notified of future endeavors, and perhaps we do more community consultation on this matter. But that's where we are today.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for making note of the fact that the comments button is not currently working. There are a lot of people in this meeting, obviously, who are anxious to provide their feedback, and many of them have noted that the comments button is not, in fact, working through the site tonight. So it would be important to get that fixed as quickly as possible. All right, I'm gonna go to the councillors to see if they have any last words for us tonight, starting with Sean Devine.
Yeah, I have some last words, but I also have some last questions, and I'll try to be quick about all of it. To all the residents listening who do intend to submit comments, because as we said, the point of this meeting is to help you prepare comments. I urge you, for the sake of what you are hoping to do, to submit comments as much as you can that are based on fact, data, policy, as opposed to submitting comments that are based on taste, emotion, feeling. And the reason I say that is not because your matters of taste, emotion, and feeling are not relevant, is because the planners will consider comments based on policy far more. That's what they're tasked to do. So I urge you to do that. I also want you all to know that part of my job, and the same thing with Councillor Brockington, is we will be submitting our submission to the planners. And so I will be continuing to listen to all of these arguments because my job is to put forward a clear, well-reasoned opinion on this file, which I will definitely be doing. I do have some last final questions, and I'll throw them out to Joey, and if he needs to give them to somebody else, fine. And the reason I have these questions is because one thing that hasn't been discussed tonight is how might this project, if it gets approved in some shape or form, how might it serve various needs in the city? So here are a few of my questions. Knowing that different people need housing, Joey, in the plan as you see it, what is the rough percentage, if you can tell me, of how many of these units, so let's say there's 1,000 units, how many would be available for rental and how many would be available for sale, roughly?
As of right now, it looks, can you guys all hear me? I changed my mic because I heard some comments where they couldn't hear me very well.
Yeah.
That's good. So Tower 1, which would be the first phase, Tower A, that as of today would be completely a rental project.
Okay.
So whatever the units in that building would be rental. Of that, using the last 2 buildings we've done, 20% would be for affordable. Would be an affordable component too. And another X amount would be for accessibility. We've partnered with a charity out of London, Ontario. It's the government funded charity that does accessible housing that we have in all 3 of our projects currently on the go. Towers 2 and 3, I mean, I would just be guessing if I said they're going to be rentals. I don't know what that looks like. The horizon looks like in 6-7 years from now when that next block would go up.
Okay. So 100% rental in Tower A, of which 20% is affordable. Okay, thank you. Knowing that one of my original concerns was I don't want to see a massive tower that is filled with nothing but 1-bedroom apartments, because that's not our need. Do you have a rough guess of what are the percentages? And let's just say Tower A, because you don't know the future for towers B and C. What are the rough estimates for what percentage of 1-bedroom units, what percentage of 2-bedroom, what percentage of 3-bedroom? Because that will, those numbers will fill different kinds of families' needs, which is the goal of good planning right now, because we need diversity.
If we look at our track record in the last 2 buildings, we do more large scale units than what you see downtown. If I'm just looking right now high level, I would say that 30% of the building, 34% would be large scale units.
By large scale,
large 2-bedroom plus units. So sometimes we do
30%.
large 2-bedroom plus dens. What we'll do is all of the corners of our building, and I'm talking about the tower, podiums are going to be very different because we're trying to make these look like townhomes, so they'll appear as towns. But all the corners of our building will all be larger scale units. I see people put some links up here. One of them downtown, what we did is we made a commitment that we would have large scale units at more than, I believe, I forget that, I don't want to be quoted on the percentage, but X amount percentage larger scale units, and we committed to that in our zoning.
Okay. I know another concern that people in the city have is to try to move away from a parking ratio of 1 parking unit, 1 parking space per unit. I think it's the 1-to-1 ratio that the city is trying to move away from. Either Chris or somebody at FOTAN, is your current parking ratio something like 0.6?
So just off the top of my head, it's 0.5 for residential units. Then it's 0.2 for visitor parking. The city seems often more preoccupied with visitor parking than residence parking. That's debatable where the impact comes from, but anyways. And then there's a component set aside, I think it's 25 parking spaces for the commercial. You're right. And that's the bylaw requirement, but the proposal is proposing a ratio closer to 1.0 per unit. Now, that's for the first building. Joey will have an opportunity by the time he does buildings 2 and 3, he's going to be able to reevaluate the parking distribution in the other buildings, because then the transit should be fully up and running.
All right. So,
Exactly.
so you might not be able to answer the second question, my next question. So as I understand the way you just said that there, for every 2 units sold, there's 1 parking spot available, correct? If it's 0.5?
That's the bylaw requirement, yes.
But that's the bylaw requirement, and you would be respecting that bylaw requirement?
We'd be exceeding it. We'd be providing, the current version of the plans would have more parking than the bylaw requires. And that's, developers have the impossible task, I always say this, of making everyone happy. They have to find a parking rate that satisfies the city's expectation related to transit ridership, but they also have to satisfy communities that they're not going to burden their streets with on-street parking. And
Okay, so with that in mind, if many people have a concern about too many cars on the street, as Christopher Gordon was saying earlier, so this might be my dumb question, but if you will be creating a maximum number of parking spaces, you will have a limit of parking spaces, and you will be selling more units than parking spaces available. Here's my dumb question. In the interest of not having an overflow of cars going onto the other streets, do you have any way of controlling how you market the project so that you are appealing to people who do not own a car, do not wish to own a car, so that you can do what you need to do to try to ensure, because otherwise, if you sell to anybody and you sell 1,000 units to 1,000 car owners and you only have 750 units, that means I've got 250 cars on the neighboring streets and I want to avoid that. So how can you control that?
So just before, maybe Joey can speak to marketing a little bit more, but maybe I didn't explain it right. The bylaw today would require 0.5 spaces per unit. So 50% of parking for the total number of units. That's what the bylaw requires. What Joey is proposing is 1 space per unit.
I don't like that.
But the issue is to avoid that overflow onto abutting streets, right? So that's what I mean. The developer has to find that balance. But the thing is, the balance may come down with future phases once the transit is up and running. So it's a good approach to say, we're going to provide 1-for-1 for phase 1. By the time we build phase 2 and 3, maybe transit ridership is considerably larger, right?
I think there are people here who might think that's not a good approach, but thank you for telling me.
And just to let you know, Councillor Devine and Brockington, that there are several examples in the city, especially the TOD areas, where exactly this routine has been used, and we're seeing it being successful. So it's a balanced approach at the beginning, knowing that as some of the comments were being made, when is transit and the timelines for transit to be there. Phase 1 is it's one scenario, but we have to transition to what it'll be in the fullness of time, particularly when transit is there. So what that gives us the opportunity to do is to see what the demands for parking are going to be, as well as monitor the generation of traffic. And again, they're not completely correlated. So it just gives us that flexibility going forward to make sure that we get the right balance in the fullness of time.
Thank you. I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I know we have kept people a long time tonight, and I appreciate your patience. Again, I want to re-amplify the point that Kelly has made. This is a long iterative process. There are lots of steps to it. As soon as they get the comments button fixed, you will continue to be able to supply your comments. There will be other opportunities to do so as this moves forward, and your councillors will definitely keep you informed. Are there any last words you want to offer up at the end of this, either Councillors Devine or Brockington?
I'll just add one thing. I know it's late and I have lots of notes here, but I'm going to focus on strategy. And it piggybacks on what Sean Devine just said. If you're sending comments to the planner or planning department, or even if this gets appealed at some point, as the city's real estate, the city's planner, who's a lawyer, says to us, you have to argue the planning merits of a file. If we want to be successful in a planning argument, you focus on the planning merits. But the final decision at Ottawa Council is not made by planners of the planning department. It's made by Ottawa City Councillors, Sean and I. And that's where, in my experience, you see how impacts to the community get added to the mix of arguments, how social impacts within communities can get included in that mix that councillors take into consideration before they make a decision. And so some arguments that are provided have no weight at all if it's going to be appealed because it doesn't have a planning, there are no planning merits attached. But all is to say, you're free to share whatever you would want to share with the city or your city councillors. If you just want to focus why you're concerned and how this is going to impact you, that's fair game. And don't feel restricted in any way about the type of comments that you provide. But if you want to focus those comments to the planner, or if Sean and I are trying to make arguments to the city, we make planning arguments to the planning department. And when we go to our colleagues who have similar files in their wards, we expand those arguments and we talk about, in addition to planning concerns we have, whether it's the secondary plan or the official plan, we talk about, and here's how it's going to impact our residents, our communities. Here are issues that have not been mitigated. Here are issues that have not been addressed, that will be lingering issues. And this is why we're concerned, and we fight that fight. So for those of you who are considering providing additional comments after tonight, I just leave that with you, that if I'm going to raise concerns, I have to understand who my audience is and make it in that regard. But this is a planning file, and a decision is going to be made by the planner on planning merits. And the planning department will take a position based solely on planning merits. But city councillors make decisions, and my experience is they do incorporate other arguments before they make a final decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. This has been a long night, but a good one. There's no question. I think we could go for hours. Frankly, there is a huge amount of community engagement, which is a good thing. And we're very glad that you could make it out tonight. One thing I do want to address before we sign off is that those of you that are concerned because of the recent election and the turnover in staff and the turnover in offices, comments that have been submitted previously are still with the planners. They are with the planning department. There is no need to resubmit comments that you have already submitted to the process. But you're more than welcome, as both the councillors have emphasized, you're more than welcome to continue submitting those comments, but there is no need to worry about the previous comments that have been supplied to the planning department having to start over again. There is no need for that. Those comments are still in the file and still will be taken into consideration by the planners, of course. Okay, thank you so much. The chat was incredibly helpful. It will be saved tonight so that we have access to it going forward. It's really important, and I'm really glad that you all engaged in the chat. The one thing that you should all take away is that none of your typing was wasted. It feeds into this process and provides us with good fodder for discussion going forward and to help us structure future discussions about this. So thank you again for taking precious time out of your day and evening to talk about this, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for coming out.